How They Find Out by Lilac Sky 128. Chapter 3. Morgana. Morgana pulled her cloak tighter around herself as she made her way through the lower towns of Camelot. She had taken the idea of disguising herself as an old woman from her sister, and the irony of this did not escape her. Her sister. She had been trying to nurse Morgause back to health for weeks, but it seemed the blow to her head on top of the magical travel could not be cured by any ordinary magic. She was on the brink of death. Morgana knew it, but she would not accept it. She had heard of a fabled way in which to regain someone's life, and so she had traveled to the Isle of the Blessed. The place of the old religion called to her as kin, and it offered her a cure. One life for another. Of course, Morgana would have given her life for her sisters in a heartbeat, but Morgause was adamant that she would not allow this, and would kill herself if Morgana even tried it. Besides, Morgause had reasoned, why sacrifice herself when another could so easily be used in her place? And so Morgana had come here, intending to use any peasant or common person she could find. However, as she entered Camelot's walls, the old anger flared up as she remembered how it was here that she had been lied to, betrayed by those she had held dear, and lived in fear simply for who she was. And she thought, why not use this opportunity? Why not get rid of an obstacle, or at least strike at Camelot's heart with precision? She had so many enemies here. Why should they be fine whilst her sister was left to suffer? And it was this thought that spurred Morgana on to travel through the lower town and further into Camelot. She had not slept for days and was half mad with lack of sleep and worry for her sister. She had no particular plan, but being used to functioning without sleep, she was still alert. Her disguise was still in place, yet she still panicked when she saw a familiar group heading towards her. Merlin, she noticed first, her lip curling in a sneer as she looked at his grinning face. And yet there was something else. She had felt his presence before she had seen him, and that was odd in itself, but the presence had also felt familiar and, in an odd sort of way, comforting, as though it appealed to a long-lost part of her. He was with two people, whom she vaguely recognized, but couldn't quite place. Both dark-haired, one looking serious, while the other laughed along with Merlin. She instinctively pulled her hood down further as she passed them, although there would be no chance of them recognizing her like this, and strode quickly on, confident of having evaded them. Merlin, though, had sensed a magic as familiar to him as his own, and so turned, almost involuntarily, in the direction the old woman had just passed in.
"Merlin?"
Gawain questioned. Merlin said, putting the pieces together and coming up with the face of a certain sorceress.
"You go on ahead, I'll catch up."
"Merlin?" Lancelot questioned, before turning back to Gawain hopelessly as the warlock moved off, seemingly in some sort of daze.
Does he always have to do that? What? Go off secretly and tell no one what he's doing? I think it's some sort of requirement.
Shall we follow him?
Up to you.
Morgana had ducked it down a side street. It was dark, and she noted, it stank. She was, however, fairly certain that she hadn't been followed.
Morgana.
A single word stopped her in her tracks. She spun on her heel, her disguise falling away as though it were water. She would need her youth for a fight. She was slightly surprised, however, to find Merlin standing there. If she had taken time to think about it, she probably would have recognized his voice, but the tone had been authoritative and confident, and somehow distinctly un-Merlin.
"Merlin,"
she stated, dropping her defenses slightly. There would be no point in killing him now, she reasoned. She supposed she could use him as the sacrifice, but there were others besides. She didn't know if the other two who were with him would notice his disappearance.
"What are you doing here?"
"I assume stopping you from trying to, take over Camelot again? Hate to break it to you, but that kind of failed the last time." Morgana's eyes widened. She had known Merlin as the bumbling, idiotic servant boy, and yet that was not the man that stood before her today. If she had been looking, of course, she may have seen hints beforehand, but here and now, it was as though the facade had suddenly dropped. She regained herself swiftly.
"I told you it had only just begun. Tell me, are you with a troupe of Arthur's pathetic little knights, or did you manage to get out alone?"
Merlin smiled slightly. "Well, Morgana, I wouldn't really tell you either way, would I?"
"I'll take that as a no, then."
You could take it however you want. Morgana cocked her head at him.
What happened to you, Merlin?
Why are you here, Morgana? Merlin asked abruptly, in a weary tone. Morgana sighed. He had her cornered, although she could easily fight her way out of it. Merlin didn't exactly offer much of a threat, but she somehow balked at the idea of killing him. Immediately, anyway. If only Morgause were here, she suddenly thought to herself with desperate longing. Morgause always made her stronger. She would know how to work this to her advantage. She sighed and, on the spur of the moment, decided on the truth, if only because she wanted to see his reaction.
Well, if you must know, thanks to your mentor or father figure, or whatever you want to call him, my sister is on the brink of death, and I know of only one way to bring her back.
What are you... Oh, Merlin said as realization dawned. You think Gaius was responsible for Margot's injuries?
Morgana frowned. Well, who else would it be?
Merlin smiled, but for the life of her, Morgana couldn't figure out why. Who indeed? He said, almost to himself. He shook himself. And one solution. Brink of death. I assume you're talking about the whole one life for another thing? Morgana's face must have betrayed her shock at Merlin knowing of such a thing and also confirmed his suspicions as he took a step towards her. And as you're here, alone, I assume you're thinking of taking someone from Camelot.
Are you going to stop me?
If I have to. Morgana laughed.
Tell me, how do you propose to do that?
I'm pretty sure I could manage it.
Really? Because I remember your sword fighting, Merlin.
Merlin's jaw was set. I will not let you kill an innocent. Morgana's face twisted unpleasantly.
I wasn't planning on killing an innocent, Merlin. Someone at least vaguely befitting of my being sacrificed for my sister.
The gods don't care whose life is taken.
And how on earth would you know?
Merlin stopped. I don't. Morgana frowned at him. I don't care who you're planning to kill, Morgana. It's not your choice.
And whose choice, pray, is it? It wasn't Gaius's when he decided to try and kill my sister.
Gaius didn't have a choice. And besides, I'm surprised the injuries inflicted did, in fact, result in her being brought to the brink of death.
Well, it wasn't wholly that.
Morgana didn't know why she was telling him this. Something about Merlin always caught her off guard.
It was also the magical travel afterwards.
Ah, Merlin said, comprehension dawning. You feel guilty. The fact was stated simply, no hint of reproach or condescension, and it sent Morgana into a rage, if only because of the sheer raw truth of what he said.
How dare you, she hissed. That is not what I feel. You have no right to presume.
She trailed off, unable to speak through her rage for a moment. You, she finally said. Forget who you're talking to. You're not trying to pull rank on me, Morgana. Somehow I don't think your status is very high at the moment.
I am not talking of anything so simple as rank. I am speaking of power.
In that case, Merlin smiled. You have no idea who you're talking to.
How hard is it to follow Merlin anyway?
He must be better at it than we give him credit for, said Goraine, glancing around the marketplace. Slippery, isn't he? Lancelot groaned. We are so stupid. Speak for yourself. Lancelot ignored him. Merlin has magic. Yes, I know. Oh. Gawain was brought up short. Yes, you're right, he said. We are so stupid. He glanced around again, although not hoping for much. Of course, Merlin would be using magic to conceal himself. As he was thinking this, a new idea struck him. Hey, does this mean he can turn invisible? Morgana shook her head in disbelief. He was frustrating her now. Well, she said, her voice heavy with sarcasm.
I'd love to stay and chat about who's the more powerful, but I do believe in pointless conversations.
Merlin moved to block her further. You don't seriously think I'm going to let you just kill someone?
I don't seriously think you have a choice,
Morgana countered.
So, she said, tapping her finger against her chin, I wonder who... I suppose Arthur will be too hard to get to right now, but I assume his...
Her lip curled in disgust.
Queen could be persuaded to attend.
She had expected Merlin to look angry at the threat, but all she saw was a deep sadness as he said, "Gwen was your friend."
Gwen betrayed me.
Merlin's eyebrows shot up. Really? When was that? When you kidnapped her brother, or was it when you almost got her executed for sorcery?
Morgana stopped. She was loyal to Arthur. She always was.
And she thought you were.
She would have taken everything from me.
Gwen loved you. As a friend, as a sister.
Because I don't understand how anyone would want to hurt their friends.
Morgana shook herself out of the memory.
It means nothing now.
You are not going to hurt her, or anyone else for that matter. Morgana smirked. Her eyes glowed a fiery gold, and she put out a hand. A stream of light flew forward and towards Merlin, and it simply disappeared. It reached a few centimeters in front of Merlin before it seemed to fizzle out. And Merlin didn't even flinch.
What?
Morgana said, trailing off as she stared at Merlin. Merlin stood still for a moment. You are not going to hurt anyone here.
You?
Morgana said, confused.
How did you?
Merlin hesitated. He shouldn't let Morgana find out about his magic, but he simply couldn't defend those he loved without it. He had recently been working on his defenses. He had grown tired of being thrown into walls, and his shield had come up almost as a reflex, only now, of course, he had to come up with an explanation for it. He sighed. I would advise you to leave. Now.
But that's impossible. Unless you don't have... Not you, you can't.
Merlin wondered if he should take her incredulity as an insult, but he was used to it. Morgana, I said you have no idea who you're talking to. I am not going to let you hurt anyone. I don't want to hurt you, but I will, if I have to. Morgana's expression was almost comical now. And Gaius wasn't responsible for your sister's injuries.
You? But you can't have...
Magic? Merlin sighed and then decided that there really was no way out of it now. Yes, actually, I can. Morgana's expression changed quickly from shock to anger.
You lied to me, she hissed.
Merlin almost laughed. You tried to kill everyone I care about. I think we're even.
You could have...
Morgana was desperately trying to wrap her head around the concept, and yet suddenly a lot of things made sense. I do understand. Of course he had understood her magic, and yet she didn't understand his. He was loyal to Arthur. He helped Arthur.
You could have told me,
she said. All right, said Merlin. You were the king's ward, Morgana. You could have had me executed with a single word.
I wouldn't have...
The words emerged from Morgana without thought, and yet she knew they were true. If Merlin had told her, while she had been just discovering her magic, she wouldn't have told a soul. He could have helped her. They could have helped each other. But he had made the decision. He had decided to let her struggle on with her magic, alone and afraid. Morgause had shown her the way. She had been the one to help her. Whatever magic Merlin had, it didn't make him an ally. It made him an enemy.
You, she said in disgust. Tell me, Merlin, do you believe you have more power than I? Do you believe you can truly stop me?
The answer came swiftly, as surprising in content as it was in confidence. Yes. Morgana laughed.
You do not know magic. You cannot. Morgause can detect magic, and she has never detected any in you. If you do indeed have any, then it must be negligible. So, she said, drawing herself to her full height and saying imperiously, I advise you to get out of my way.
Merlin's brows furrowed and then cleared. I suppose she can't detect what she cannot fathom. He smiled slightly, looking less than intimidated. Tell me, Morgana, have you ever heard of Emrys?
The greatest sorcerer that's ever, or will ever live, yes.
Morgana said, almost by rote, impatient, as she wondered what on earth this had to do with anything. Merlin smiled slightly, remaining still as Morgana's eyes widened.
You cannot, she stated. Be serious.
Personally, said Merlin, I'm surprised Mordred hasn't told you.
I haven't seen Mordred for months now,
she said faintly, her eyes still fixed on Merlin. And she watched, stunned, as Merlin's eyes glowed. We should go and tell Arthur.
Oh, said Gawain. I'm sure that will go down great. Hey, Arthur, so Merlin wandered off somewhere and, well, he's probably defeating some magical threat all on his own. Yeah, I'm sure that won't raise any questions. All the same, we should search the town first. We have done. Lancelot, allow me to introduce you to the wonders of science streets. Lancelot tried not to think of how that sounded and shook his head as Gawain headed off. Morgana found herself pinned to the wall behind her. Invisible bonds held her as she struggled. Merlin walked toward her as she tried all the incantations she knew, although they seemed to have no effect. Leave, Morgana, he repeated, or I swear I will kill you. Morgana hadn't thought that Merlin could look menacing, but now a man of indefinable powers stood before her.
Well, she said, it's not like you haven't tried before.
Merlin flinched, and Morgana smiled. Merlin had a weakness, his kindness. He would not kill her until the very last minute. She could convince him.
Why do you stay here, Merlin?
She dropped her voice, so it was deceptively soft.
Arthur would see you burn if he ever knew the truth.
Merlin shook his head. Merlin stopped. That's not the issue. The issue is you leaving.
But you know that, don't you? And yet you stay. Why? Why not just leave? You could join those who are loyal to magic. We want the same thing, Merlin.
Merlin shook his head. You are not loyal to magic. Those that defile it, use it to injure and bring evil, are only betraying magic. It is meant to be used for good. And if you think I would ever join you, he looked disgusted. You are severely mistaken. Now, he said louder, you will leave. The sound of applause came as a surprise to both of them, and Merlin stepped back. It was only then that Morgana noticed how close they had been to each other. Well said, Merlin, said Gawain, emerging from the shadows, clearly the source of the clapping. Lancelot looked warily from Morgana to Merlin. Now, said Gawain, we've come to help Merlin, haven't we, Lancelot? We have indeed, Gawain. Only, it looks like he has it covered, doesn't it? Oh, more than covered. Morgana's fury was ill-concealed as her eyes glowed, and Gawain was sent flying backwards before anyone had a chance to do anything. It was a testament to his balance that he didn't hit his head, instead landing painfully on his back. Morgana found herself being slammed back into the wall again as the bonds had been getting looser. Now they returned with renewed strength. I'll do anything to protect them. I would expect nothing less. Morgana realized in that instance that Merlin's threat then had been very real and very, very true. And it extended to everyone. She was never good at realizing when she had lost, but she found herself thinking that getting away from Merlin would be something of a victory in itself. Emrys. She had, deliberately, she was sure, not bound her magic. She could easily disappear, which was surely what he wanted anyway. He didn't want to kill her, he just wanted to stop her. Morgana felt the deep sadness that Merlin had been displaying earlier, for what could have been, and what never could. They were locked together, but in constant enmity. She wasn't about to rethink her position, and she was sure he wasn't about to rethink his. For a moment, Morgana locked eyes with Merlin, and in that moment there was nothing but them. Merlin and Morgana. She knew him, and he in turn understood her wholly. What could have been? But it was only for a moment, and then Morgana's lips curled in a smirk, her eyes glowed gold, and she disappeared in a swirl of light. Merlin felt incredibly weary the moment she had disappeared, but he turned to Gawain, who was being held up by Lancelot. Are you all right? He asked. No, said Gawain. Ow! Okay, said Lancelot. Now, we should tell Arthur. And Gawain partially supported between them. The three made their way back to Camelot. Morgana reached her sister's bedside. She had not grown better. If anything, she had worsened. Sister, Morgana asked, drifting into semi-consciousness. Were you successful? Morgana shook her head and said one word. Just one word. It explained everything. Merlin.